cool guy.
Yeah.
Kenny Rogers, a gentleman. Fox News alert now, day 8 of that government partial shutdown. The White House is upping the ante, threatening that Social Security checks might be delayed if Republicans don't do a deal on the debt ceiling by October 17th. So you see these stories are crisscrossing one another yet again today. I'm Bill Hemmer. A lot to cover today, and welcome here to America's Newsroom.
Hello, welcome everybody. That's going to get a little attention. The Social Security issue. I'm Martha McCallum. Great to see you this morning. So the government shutdown so far has had no impact on Social Security, but that could change, we're hearing. The Social Security Administration tells reporters that failure to raise the nation's borrowing limit could indeed jeopardize the checks of millions of seniors.
So meanwhile, still no deal to open the government. Republicans say it is obvious the president does not want a deal. Here's the House Speaker.
This morning, a senior White House official said that the president would rather default than to sit down and negotiate. Really? The president, I'm going to say this again. A senior White House staffer this morning said that the president would rather default on our debt than to sit down and negotiate. Now, the American people expect when their leaders have differences, and we're in a time of crisis, that we'll sit down and at least have a conversation. Really, Mr. President, it's time to have that conversation before our economy is put further at risk.
All right, Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel tracking all this live on the Hill. Is this really going to happen, Mike?
Well, Bill, good morning. A senior Republican official I spoke with called this scaremongering. The Social Security Administration saying that unlike the government shutdown, the debt ceiling is different and cannot guarantee payments beyond October 17th. Republican officials say that they know what they're doing. They're trying to get Social Security recipients to call Congress and try to do something about it. Meanwhile, Republicans here on Capitol Hill say it is time to instill some fiscal discipline and sit down and negotiate.
We're not going to give the president a clean debt ceiling increase. That's like maxing out your credit card. You hadn't made any arrangements to pay your pre-existing bills. You want to get some more credit so you can borrow some more money. That's a recipe for disaster for our country.
On the government shutdown, the House continues to pass targeted funding bills. Today it'll pass a bill for Head Start, the children's program, and also some other funding for local schools.
Got it. Is there a split that you're seeing on the Democratic side, Mike, or not?
Well, it's interesting because Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid continues pushing for a one-year debt ceiling increase with no negotiation. He's expected to bring up a bill in the Senate later this week to try to force that, to see if he has the votes to go forward with the debt ceiling increase. But at the White House, they are signaling they would be willing to something perhaps a little shorter.
We think that the Congress ought to raise the debt ceiling without drama or delay. If they do that, that's a great thing. It's up to them to set the duration of that.
As for when all this will wrap up, everybody I've talked to says, you know, the Hill, Capitol Hill, is deadline driven. And even when they have a deadline, like October 17th is right now, sometimes they can fudge it a bit.
All right, talking to each other, or at each other. That's the better preposition. Thank you, Mike Emanuel, leading our coverage there on the Hill. Martha.
Fudging a deadline. Whoever heard of such a thing, right? Is that what's going to happen here? Meanwhile, Senator Ted Cruz, one of the men who is leading the fight to keep Obamacare out of the budget, not mincing words on what he calls the president's lack of leadership in this shutdown battle. Last night, he told our own Megyn Kelly that the president he believes is MIA.
The president has kept such a low profile. He has been AWOL. He has not been part of the negotiations. He's been refusing even to talk to Congress. He finally invited congressional leaders to the White House, and he sat down with them and said, "You're here because I want to tell you I'm not going to negotiate." I mean, that's not reasonable.
Meanwhile, the finger pointing continues as President Obama says that it's the Republicans, not him, who refuse to negotiate.
Meanwhile, an update on the Amber Alert website. Apparently back in action, is back online now. If you tried to log on to the Justice Department's Amber Alert website yesterday, this is what you saw: shut down due to a lack of funds. But there was a big outcry, and the White House was peppered with questions about it. A furloughed federal worker was called back to get the page up and running again. Authorities stressed the missing child alert system itself was not down, just the website. Bulletins were still going out to law enforcement across the country.
Hundreds of thousands of civilian employees at the Department of Defense also now back to work. At the Pearl Harbor shipyard in Hawaii, that is more than 2,500 people.
It's frustrating. It's kind of embarrassing. to see that neither side will give a little, and all these people are suffering, because there were people at work who were crying last week about the furloughs going on.
Congress is considering a bill that would give furloughed employees back pay for the days they missed.
So, you know, that debt ceiling deadline grows closer, 9 days away now. White House Chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors, a gentleman by the name of Jason Furman, explaining how we actually know what the magic day is for default in the first place.
So on that day, you can no longer borrow. You have $30 billion in the bank. $30 billion in a place that's running nearly $4 trillion a year, that's plus or minus $50 billion on any given day, is not a lot of money. You'll have days, not weeks, until you deplete that money.
So that's the White House position. Others, like Rand Paul, say that is simply not true, that the government will have enough money to pay its bills past the October 17 deadline.
So here we are, and some top bankers are now warning lawmakers not to play games with our debt bills, saying that if the government chooses to pay the interest first on the debt over some obligations like Social Security, they believe that that could be catastrophic for our economy. Let's talk to Stuart Varney about that, host of Varney and Company on the Fox Business Network. Stuart, good morning to you. What do you think about this whole issue of potentially paying the interest on the debt and not the underlying bills first?
Well, that is called prioritization. In other words, you play favorites with who you pay off first. Now, prioritization, as it applies to this argument, is you pay the interest on the debt first. If you do that, you avoid technical default. You do not default if you're paying interest on your debt. Now, all these top bankers, they've held a meeting with President Obama and with some top Republicans, and they've said, look, this prioritization, pay the interest first, that will not work. If you go past the deadline of October 17th with no deal, interest rates will go up, stock market prices will go down, and the economy will take a very big hit. They're saying prioritization, paying interest first, it won't work. That's what they say. But Martha, hold on a second. Just look at the timetable for a moment. Between October 17th and November the 15th, we've got to pay $36 billion in interest, and we've got to pay $50 billion out in Medicare, Social Security, and military pay. We've got enough money coming in tax receipts to cover those bills. Prioritization is not required. So you've got a warning from the bankers, you've got a warning from China, and Wall Street is yawning. This morning, stock prices will actually open a little higher.
You know, I mean, it seems ridiculous, Stuart. So, you know, Rand Paul made this argument over the weekend as well, that we have enough revenue coming in to pay the interest and to pay the underlying fundamental bills that need to be paid. So what's up?
Remember the politics here. There's a scare thing going on here.
Yeah, sounds like it.
If you say, look, Wall Street's going to take a tumble, the economy's going to take a hit, if we just go past that deadline, that is putting pressure. And I think it's the administration which is applying this pressure, saying to Congress, you've got to get past, we've got to have a deal before that deadline. And if you don't, all hell breaks loose. Excuse my language. It's a scare tactic in many respects.
You know, I mean, I feel in many ways we saw the same thing with the sequester, that it was going to be, you know, Armageddon after the sequester. And unfortunately, the result of this is that it's like the boy who cried wolf. And then people maybe are not cognizant enough of the true underlying fundamental financial difficulties that the country truly does face.
It is the sky is falling argument all over again. With sequester, the sky did not fall. Maybe it's the same thing this time.
Yeah, Stuart, thank you very much. We'll see what happens. We'll see you later.
Now on Obamacare, and the big question for the White House after a week of the exchanges being open for business, how many people have actually signed up for insurance? The Health and Human Services Secretary, Kathleen Sebelius, went on The Daily Show with Jon Stewart last night and answered that very question. The answer now.
Fully enrolled? I can't tell you because I don't know. We are taking applications on the web, on the phone. We'll be giving monthly reports, but I can tell you we've had not only lots of web hits, hundreds of thousands of accounts created. We have
so it's been hundreds of thousands of people have signed up.
Of accounts created, which means that then they're going to go shopping.
The interview went on from there, and I think in the end, Stuart was as confused at the end of the segment as he was when he began. So we've sent Byron York out to try and figure out the investigation of the glitches and the problems out there, and he's going to join us next hour. This is something we're watching on a daily basis. The White House and Sebelius saying they will provide monthly updates. Remember, a hit is one thing, a website logon is one thing, a person who registers is one thing, but when you actually buy insurance, that's what you're going for.
I mean,
right now we don't know.
There is a bit of a grace period. You know, it will take people a while to go onto the website, to look it all over, to figure out what makes sense for them. But I think when that 1 month period rolls around, everybody's going to expect to see some pretty significant numbers. And if they can't produce those then, there's going to be a lot more questions.
Well, see, there's a reason why you do the Jon Stewart show. That's that is a young audience, and I mean that's the push you're going for from the White House.
I don't know if she moved the ball in terms of clarifying things for those young people. That's one of the big questions. And Karl Rove is also going to talk about what he thinks about those numbers and whether or not we should know what they are at this point. He's coming up in a moment as well.